Hey guys, it's nice to be talking to you guys again about winter, even though it's kind of winding down at this point after starting off pretty active. Yeah, so the fact that December ended up, I guess, kind of as cold as it did, or at least parts of it. A lot of the time, the way the winter starts can be indicative of kind of the way it's headed. I mean, it's not always true. I mean, like you can have sometimes where there isn't much of a seasonal trend, but a lot of the time, like winter generally kind of shows itself in November and especially December. And given the fact that it was cold, I mean, it wasn't exactly snowy. I mean, that was also a theme of the winter. Um, but yeah, just kind of the way it started off gave us some warning signs, considering that some of the analogs that we had for this year were all kind of had that same sort of pattern. Definitely just kind of the pattern and the way that the month ended up was a little bit, I guess, concerning. Like probably the biggest thing this year that was a surprise was talking about sort of like Atlantic blocking. So a lot of like high pressure over Greenland and whatnot. Like all the indicators that we were looking at weren't really favoring a lot of blocking. It was actually favored for the winter to not be very blocky at all. And that just kind of didn't really happen. And like a lot of that northern Atlantic blocking and stuff like that, that's probably the hardest thing to predict more than like it's hard to predict 2 weeks out, let alone months out. I wouldn't call it impossible. Like you can have correlations and whatnot, but yeah, that was definitely a surprise because we got two like pretty legit blocking spells, one in January and then one in February. And to get one is good enough. To get two is pretty impressive and not really expected. So that definitely changed things. Yeah, it was probably seeing that blocking start to show up like on the models. Um, once by the time we got into late December, one of the other things is that the Pacific Jet is pretty important when it comes to like long range weather forecasting, and it seemed like a lot of the time um, the models were kind of underdoing how strong the Pacific Jet was, which normally would seem, I guess, um, like kind of like a warm signal because you'd be like, oh, they're underdoing the Pacific Jet, so there's going to be a lot of Pacific air working into the pattern. But like, it's not always that simple because with La Nina winters like the one that we're in, the jet is usually really weak, and when it's really weak, you usually get high pressure that's kind of like west of Alaska, and that leads to most of the cold getting dumped into the northwest. So then, if the jet is undermodeled, then all of that sort of pushes east, and you get a lot of that high pressure now over Alaska and over the west coast, and you get more cold air here. And that was a common theme, and we were seeing that play like it happened in December, and then it was showing up and happening again, like probably in early January, and then we're like, okay, like this is probably just indicative of the way it's gonna go, and that happened like a couple more times this year. It wasn't exactly like a given that it was going to happen, but it seemed more likely than not. Yeah. No, I mean, like, so it's odd. Like, the thing about this year is that, like, in the grand scheme of things, like, it was cold. Like, in terms of, like, the actual, like, 3 month averages, I'm pretty sure we're going to end up with a 3 month average that is below normal, which is pretty tough to do now, actually. Um, but, we didn't really have any. I know we had that one legit cold snap, but, like, we didn't have, like, sustained super super cold weather like 14 15 or something. But the thing is that it never really got warm. Like, we never had like an absolute torch period, kind of like what. No, no, like, there was no like week of 50s or something like that. Like, it was just consistently normal, or like, pretty cold. So nothing insane or anything like that. But yeah, it's definitely been a while since we've had a winter like this, where it was kind of like nickel and dime-ish. Like, there haven't been any big storms, but there's been a lot of them, and it's been pretty cold throughout. It's been a long time. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, that's definitely a bit abnormal. I mean, a lot of the time, again, like when it's cold, is you get like these big Arctic highs, which don't bode well for a lot of wind. But here, there's just been a lot of like low pressure kind of in like the northern Atlantic and offshore and stuff. And then when you get these big coastals that kind of miss and graze, you still get like the pressure gradient from them, so it's still windy. And that's also why, like, if you kind of look at those departures from normal, they're not super crazy, because a lot of the time the way that we get those super strong departures is when it's cold and clear and calm. And yeah, so the winds keep it's easy to keep the overnight lows from dropping that much. Yeah, like, I remember a lot of times the overnight lows didn't drop as much as people were expecting, because the winds just kind of kept things from doing so. So that definitely hindered things. So yeah, it definitely felt cold with the wind, because it doesn't matter with the apparent temperature. But in terms of like the raw temps, that's definitely one of the reasons why, like, on average this year isn't going to like show up like in like a like top 10 coldest winter. It's not going to be that bad in terms of like raw departures. It was, yeah. It was that one week. Yeah, probably. I'm not sure. Yeah, over there, I'm not sure the last time. It's definitely been a while for sure. I think in New York City they dropped into the single digits, which is honestly pretty impressive in and of itself. Yeah, it's tough. Yeah, so in January, so we had those two big blocking spells. There was one in like early January, and then the last one ended recently in mid-February. So in early January, the issue, at least for us, and that's the thing with talking about stuff like this is that like there were like parts of the country that did see like significant snow. Yeah. So like in early January, we did have that blocking spell, but the thing is that it was positioned in a way that wasn't really that favorable for like, the northern mid-Atlantic and New England to see that much snow. Like it was too far south. It wasn't it just wasn't oriented correctly. Like the orientation of it was such that it put a lot of low pressure a little bit like it was kind of blocking things from moving far north enough. So basically, like DC and like Delaware and like Northern Virginia got a lot of snow, but it just did it. It just couldn't push northward. Like if the blocking was a little bit weaker, then it would have done so. Which is a risk that you run with those kinds of blocking patterns. Like that's kind of the main thing. It's like yeah, they can produce big storms, but you just run the risk of things being suppressed. There was another system, of course. There was the historic Gulf Coast snowstorm. Yeah, that was pretty insane. That one was again um, just a matter. Well, also one of the other things too is besides the blocking, we have had a pretty active Pacific jet, which those things kind of come in cycles. I mean, I guess it's easy to I guess explicitly blame climate change for stuff like that, and of course it plays a part, but there is some kind of over attribution with stuff like that where people try to find, you know, I wouldn't call the weather completely irrational, but, if you try to rationalize absolutely everything, then it can lead to, like perfectly, yeah, and it doesn't really work like that. So with that storm, with the Gulf Coast storm, the a lot of the high pressure out west that helps kind of let these storms kind of build and move north. It just kind of got flattened a little bit because there was just a little bit too much stuff going on out west with the Pacific jet. So that's a factor. That also sort of played a part with the storm in mid February that kind of never came to be. Basically, that was another very, very, very favorable setup. And that's the thing, like when we say stuff like that, where like basically the equivalent of like a favorable setup is that I don't know. Let's just say, for the sake of argument, that there's like a 1% chance that New York City gets 6 inches of snow on any given day. Like with a pattern like that, maybe it's like 15% or something. So it's like, yeah, it's 15 times higher. Like it's a really good setup, but like it's still 15%. Like you still need things to kind of like fall into place. And with that one, there were just little nuances in the setup. Like it was a little bit more precarious than I guess a lot of people thought because it's never a shoe in. And yeah, like with the Pacific Jet, there was just a little bit too much kind of crashing onto the West Coast, and it interfered with the storm being able to like fully strengthen. Not just that, too, like the low pressure with that system just kind of got a little bit more disorganized as we got closer. So yeah, I mean it's just the thing is that from like I don't know 20 honestly the late 2000s, the mid 2000s really, until like 2021, it just seems like every single every single wave would just wrap up and turn into like this big storm, and it's like not actually that easy. Like you need a lot of stuff to come together. So I think expectations got a little bit skewed, and now it's like we're kind of seeing the flip side of it where you have little features that kind of spoil things, which is honestly kind of the way it had been for like a long time. Like if you look at like the late 70s, 80s, and 90s, you would have to wait like 5 to 10 years to get like a legitimate huge storm. And in the 2010s, they were like growing on trees. Like you'd get like two a winter. Like it would be super, super easy. And it's not really that easy. Yep, 2021, yeah, February. Yeah. No, they've gotten a ton of snow this year. They've gotten like destroyed. It'll probably never happen again. I mean, at least in our lifetimes. I mean, I think it does. Yeah, I'm pretty sure. I think they got 5 inches with one storm. I mean, again, like it's balancing out. I mean, they're still paying for 2015 basically. They got 110 inches of snow. Honestly, like there doesn't seem to be really all that much. I mean, there, was kind of like sort of like a little wave today, basically, which gave some snow to, like northern New England, central New England, and like those areas. And then, Saturday we have another sort of like weak little clipper. Gets pretty quiet after that. And then I think we're probably going to have to wait until, really in terms of seeing any sort of like potential risk for the Northeast, probably between like the 8th and the 12th. If you're in the Midwest, maybe there could be something around like the 5th of next week, like midweek next week, but that's going to be pretty marginal and dependent on like a really strong low pressure wrapping up, bringing in some cold air. So that's something to watch over there, but it will be kind of difficult unless you live in, like northern Wisconsin or northern Michigan. Um, but yeah, I would say maybe watch for something around the 8th to the 12th. That's a hell of a way out there, so it's pretty difficult to say all that much right now. But then after that, I mean, by the time we get into like mid March, pretty much every indication is that it's going to get pretty warm. I mean, warm in terms of like mid-March standards. So, I wouldn't be expecting 70s or anything like that. It's just too early. But I think we're probably going to be looking at like a pretty legit run of warm weather, at least relatively speaking, for, I would say from probably like, end of the week of the 9th. So kind of like the 12th to 15th is probably when things get going. And then you could probably have, nice solid like 2 week stretch of like some pretty nice weather, I think. So in terms of snow, it'll be pretty difficult after the 15th to get much more than kind of, like a super well timed like nighttime kind of thing if you're, pretty far north basically. Doubt it. At this time of year, you always see like the people talking about the stratosphere warming and whatnot. That's pretty common by the time you get into March. So there are some indications that that happens in mid March, but there are a few caveats where it's like it actually has to like impact where we live, which is not a given. And then B, it actually has to do something by the time we get to like late March, early April, which there is a lag with this stuff. Like it takes if it truly does impact us, it will take weeks until it does. It takes like 2 to 3 weeks. I mean, I don't think that that's particularly likely. Like, I feel like a lot of the time when you do have those really blocky Aprils, it starts to kind of show up in like, like mid late March, and we're not seeing any of that. So it would take a pretty big pattern flip, which I just kind of wouldn't bank on. So yeah, I mean, with the pattern that we're looking at for kind of mid March, wouldn't be surprised if we had like one legitimately really really warm day and like thrown in there. If you get a strong low tracking up, like the Midwest, it would not be surprising if we like broke into like the 60s or something like that. It would. Yeah, and then it gets taken away from you like 2 days later when the cold front comes through. Yeah. I'm in agreement there. Yeah. If winter's done, yeah. If winter's done, I just want it to be warm. Yeah, now I would say this is like on the wasted potential scale, this is probably like an 8 or a 9. Like in terms of like the patterns that showed up and like the return on them. Again, for here, like for like north of like Philly, basically. The Mid Atlantic parts of the Mid Atlantic had a great year, so you can't really, I'm sure down there, if if you want snow, this is probably one of the better years in the last 10 down there. Yeah, definitely. They're like double, triple their average in some spots. It's crazy. No, no. Yeah, of course.